Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this very exciting call tonight, learning all about the Mamluk Empire. Thank you again, Mustafa, our phenomenal content writer. And I'm excited to announce Abby, who is another phenomenal content writer and our development coordinator, to help co-interview tonight. So very exciting stuff to learn and engage. As a reminder, this call will be on many places: our website, our podcast, our YouTube, our Instagram TV, and obviously you're watching this on Facebook right now, so it'll be saved there as well. Just thank you again all for being here tonight. So excited to learn about this empire. I'll have Abby read the first 101 word introduction and we'll see what happens from there. Take it away, Abby.
Thanks, Ben. So the Mamluk people saw it all. From slavery to safety, the Mamluk societal status changed immensely. From 1910 to 1920, most of the Mamluk people were laid to rest inside the tombs of the Mamluks, a burial site in the depths of Cairo. The word Mamluk, meaning owned, refers to the Mamluk people's time as slaves. However, in a pleasant twist of fate and turn of events, the plighted Mamluk people changed their status and presided over modern-day Egypt and modern-day Syria for centuries. The Mamluk Dynasty held its own as a major power in the region from 1250 to 1517.
Tell us more, Mustafa. Fascinating just switch of everything that they saw. What most surprised you in doing this research? We'll start there.
I mean, their resilience, the fact that they were able to turn the tides that were so clearly against them and so clearly holding them down from being in, we could say indentured, but I think they're closer to slaves. And what surprised me the most was how they, not the fact that they were able to reverse their fate in that regard, but also how they were able to go about it, and what they focused on once they gained power, including ways of crafting architecture, creating buildings and laying landscapes that still stand today in those present day areas, right? And I think the other thing that really took me for a surprise was the difference between the two Mamluk dynasties. I think most dynasties you would have one long reign, but this one was actually split into two, right? So we had actually two peoples that were considered Mamluks, but they came from different regions at different times. I think the Circassian background really took me for a spin because that was unexpected, and that drew parallels back to the country of Turkey as we know it today. And yeah, I mean, it was honestly surprise after surprise. It was a lot of history that I had not been aware of.
Do you think you could speak a little bit more to the actual overthrow of the Mamluk slaves in the Ayyubid civilization and how, like, what that actual process looks like that you're speaking about the resilience of?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the specifics, I recall that in the early days when the Mamluks were attempting to regain their power, right? They went about it a number of ways. I think the first step that they took would not have been possible without several battles, right? Several you don't want to call them skirmishes, but you can call them battles. And I think that there were, on the timeline, there's multiple events like those that really set off that chain of events for them. And I also think that trying to think back to that time, the sort of and feel free to chime in if you feel me sort of not finishing my sentence in time, but I think that um, I think that what like I'm if you could help me refresh my memory on what was that first step that the Mamluks took, because it
Well,
was
I can jump in if you want, because you wrote about this a little, and I um, did a little YouTubing too, because I'm more of a visual learner. But I think that they actually took Louis the Ninth captive. France invaded, and they took him captive and like held a ransom, and were able, when the Sultan was killed, I believe, of the Ayyubid civilization, they were able to ransom one of the Mamluk leaders, as like they married him to the Sultan who was killed's wife. And so they were able to like join the dynasties and then become masters over the people who had enslaved them, which I thought was really, I mean, that's pretty dramatic. And I told Ben this earlier. I don't know if you've seen Game of Thrones, but the whole like slave soldiers revolting and taking ownership over their masters felt very unsullied, like the unsullied army in Game of Thrones, which I thought was really kind of interesting. Yeah.
Well, I think it's cool too because most of this is our seventh civilization in review, and we have so many more for the following Fridays. But all of the ones we've talked about so far and all the other civilizations we posted don't really have this sort of enslaved or minority or separate community revolting against the larger power at the time. Yes, there has been many a battle, but it's usually two opposing communities fighting against each other, and then whoever wins gets that landmass. Whereas this one is largely the same landmass that the Ayyubids already had, and yet, fought against their captors. I don't know. I love that comparison to Game of Thrones for those who are Game of Thrones fans out there. That's obviously much easier to recall than 800 years ago. But yeah, no, I think what I love about this dynasty is that there's also many Mamluks. I mean, that is an Arabic word just meaning owned. And so there are Mamluk dynasties in most Islamic empires throughout the whole history of the Minas-Wana region. And yet this one is notable because it was such a rebellion overthrowing the Ayyubids. Did not realize Louis XIV was taken hostage. That is a very fascinating little side effect. I'll definitely have to add a cool hyperlink to this. But yeah, Mustafa, in that research of this resilience that you've mentioned a couple times, was there more that excited you in learning about the Mamluk community? Especially, obviously, you've mentioned their architecture today is stunning, and a lot of modern Cairo is directly the Mamluks. But I was just curious if there's anything more that in this specific aspect you want to chat about.
Yeah, they bucked a lot of trends. They including the trend that when it came to the inheritance of power, who would gain that power, right? Pre-Mamluks, it was pretty much decided by family, and the Mamluks sort of bucked that trend when it came to if your father, if your mother was a Mamluk, I believe the theory was that you could either gain that footing that they did in their life, or that was designated elsewhere. That was designated more to allies, which also leads to like the allyship factor. Despite their status in civilization, just years, a few months even before they gained power, some of their enemies, not I wouldn't say many, but some of their enemies, in fact, became their allies. And due to their trading and due to the routes that they took on the oceans, they became desirable allies for a lot of people in that region, and that became crucial to their development as an empowered people.
So you're speaking to their allies a bit, and I was wondering, for the first phase, you could say, of the Mamluk dynasty, can you speak a bit to their rivalries and what? I know they had a big battle with the Mongols, and I think you wrote about a few others, but in that first dynasty, who else were they encountering?
Well, yeah, I think the Mongols, most definitely. They were also encountered a lot of backlash from some of the, I believe it was the peoples from I believe it was the rivalries, like some rivalries that they had while they were slaves still carried on despite their shift in status. So most of their existing rivalries, well, not most, but a select few, like carried on, right? Um, you may have the names of those, but they're escaping me at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, you wrote Armenians, and then as well as the Venetians, but you said that they kept trading with them despite the rivalry. So they sound like they were big traders.
Yeah, I mean, the trading was huge for them, and I think that you know bizarre, like hot and cold relationship with the Venetians and with the with the Venetians sort of excuse me, sort of like, in my mind, almost like foreshadowed a lot of the tensions that we have even in today's like sociopolitical climate amongst countries. Like, sure, like they'll do one thing that will entice you to them, but they turn the other cheek, and well, you don't like that. So um it's almost like there's always like two sides to a coin, right? And that was what happened with the Mamluk dynasty.
Fascinating. What I find really interesting about this as well is given their role reversal, really, from enslaved to then ruler, but then to maintain that for 300 years. I mean, clearly they had enemies and fought many battles, but they were able to continue their power, really, in a sense. Architecturally shaping not just Egypt, but a lot of parts of Italy, and cathedrals and whatnot across the Mediterranean has Ayyubid techniques, and architecture and design. There's a lot of, my favorite section of every single civilization that we have is the modern influence section, because it's just so fascinating to think of, an empire 5,000 years ago, or in this case 800, how it still impacts XYZ aspect of today. And clearly architecturally is Mamluk's biggest imprint. You talked about the ablak design, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, about the different colored stones that you've probably seen, that red, white, black sort of alternation. But I was curious if there's other architectural marvels or designs or whatnot that you particularly like looking at that are Mamluk in their origin.
Yeah, I mean, there's no shortage of them. I think a lot of their key accomplishments were in fact in that architecture. There's one in particular named the Mosque Madrasa, and that was commissioned by the Mamluk Sultan of Egypt, right? And his name was An-Nasir Hassan, and I want to say that was in the second like period of their rule. So that was like, to this day, it actually remains one of the world's largest mosques, right? And for them to have that ambition and foresight, and the well, here's the thing: the underlying theme amongst both sets of these times of Mamlukian rule, right, was what they did for religion. I think that subconsciously, whatever they wanted to accomplish was done with their faith in mind. Um, and when you go from indenture to free, not just free but a ruler, they felt that higher power was like sort of helping them, or they felt some sort of allegiance to that credo, right? So I mean, that was really cool to see, because they did a lot for the advancement of architecture, and everything they did was sort of fueled by their by their belief in, in faith. And I think that that was really important, which is, you know, a little difficult to speak on because um, faith in itself and religion is so controversial when it comes to civilization, um, because at the end of the day, this is what people did. But at the same time, I think it's to be noted, and it led to that amazing monument, which is still frequented, even to this day.
That's super interesting. And you've spoken now quite a bit about the crossovers between the two dynasties. Can you, to whatever your knowledge is, just speak a little bit to what that transition looked like and how, like, very uniquely this civilization has very two separate dynasties? Approximately when that occurred and why that occurred?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think the first dynasty was Bahri Mamluks, right? And that's Bahri. Um, they were the ones who had the most issue with the Ayyubid Sultan, and the Ayyubid Sultan was the one who actually was ruling over them, right? And so when that Ayyubid Sultan transitioned, or passed away at their hands, that was when that Bahri Mamluk dynasty was actually incepted, and that was in 1249. They fled modern day Cairo, Egypt, right, to form an alliance with the same people that Sultan was presiding over. And at that time, that Mongol Empire that you were speaking on not too long ago, they had besieged modern day Baghdad in Iraq, but they were defeated by Mamluks, which was really rare because Mongolians at the end of the day were some of the most powerful people to walk the planet. Things changed when, like, the Circassians that I was talking about, right, the ethnic group from that northeast shore of the Black Sea, they revolted against the Mamluk dynasty. And then the Burji Mamluk dynasty began. So you had Bahri and then you had Burji. And an easy way to remember it is that they both have 5 letters in them and they both start with the letter B. But that dynasty began, and that marked the emergence of the Circassian Mamluks, which is the same thing as Burji, right? They had a different identifier for their ethnic group that came in front of the Mamluk word. What brought that chapter of Mamluk history to an end was a loss at the hands of the Ottomans, which were Turkey based.
Wow. Yeah, I mean that's a huge span of history. Those 300 years of the Bahri and the Burji, hopefully I pronounced those both correctly. The alliances that they made with fellow Mamluk communities. This is just a really fascinating relationship building. It is, as you mentioned, quite rare to beat the Mongols, but also for a disenfranchised group like the Ayyubid slaves to gain enough resources and power and influence to then overthrow their captors. I think that's a really, there's a powerful lesson in there somewhere. And audience members, try to find it if you can, but I think resilience is a really great term for it, and that's right where you started today, Mustafa. So thank you for beginning there. I'm also say the Mosque Madrasa you mentioned is the main image for Mamluk 101. I mean, it was taken a couple of years ago in modern Cairo, but it still stands from when it was built 700 years prior. So just a lot of really, really fascinating, exciting aspects, and how some of these empires have rubble, and was beautiful things, but has not last till today. And for one of the world's largest mosques to still have that title 700 years on, it's just something I'm really excited for. Mamluk is one of the few empires I knew a lot about before Alfuzaiq was created. I mean, we have 75 empires. I did not know that many, and I don't know many who would, but the Mamluks is, I think, just because it's a common Arabic word, regardless of this dynasty, Mamluk is it is an actual word. And so, you know, you hear the Mamluk people of X empire or the Mamluk period of X empire, but for this just to be the Mamluk dynasty, end of sentence, I think is also really powerful, that they are the largest, I guess, or biggest, most well-known, most long-lasting, all of those great adjectives, Mamluk. So thank you again for writing this and sharing this really, really fascinating knowledge. It's really excellent. I have a little question about their military. I mean, obviously they did relatively well to survive for 300 years and then lost to the Ottomans in the very end. But I'm assuming there's a connection with the military, the trade, the armies, the conquest partners, kind of all sort of mixed in one, as most empires have that, you know, trifecta. Do you have anything more about their cavalry, their military, their strength? It's okay if you don't. I'm just mainly curious. That's always a common theme in most of these empires.
Of course. No, for sure. Like there was an agreement between the kings of three separate entities. That's the king of Leon, the king of Galicia, and the seventh Bari, Mamluk Sultan, right? So that seventh Bari Sultan, which seven, like one Sultan is a lot, but now you have seven. And when they reached this agreement, which was called the Catalan Mamluk Treaty, that treaty that secured the Mamluk civilization's naval defense. So their marine force became such a huge power in the Mediterranean, and they saw that the Catalans were becoming a power in the Mediterranean too, and they decided to form an allyship with them, and that's how they really ruled a lot of the action that went on in the Mediterranean Sea. Not to say that they were engaging like in anything illegal, but they were, anything like unjust or even like inhumane. But they just had such a stronghold on those waters that they were able to command trade due to the power of that aquatic military.
Well, I think maybe have one more question that I'm just curious about, and then we'll wrap up. Abby, I think you had something you wanted to ask, if you want to take it away.
I was just going to note that that's really interesting, and I had seen that the Mamluks were originally enslaved as soldiers' slaves, as opposed to traditional agricultural slaves or something. So it's not interesting, but makes sense that they would then use that, from what I understand, incredibly intricate training and knowledge to dictate how they ruled. Just makes sense.
Yeah, this has been a really enlightening conversation. Thank you, Mustafa, for doing this research, for educating our global community. I really don't have many more things to say other than everyone go read it. There's other things we didn't talk about here tonight, and there's so much more to this empire that are really embedded. And again, if you ever find yourself in Cairo, you can thank the Mamluks to a lot of the beautiful architecture that you see there, or even in parts of Italy. I think the Genoan Cathedral has some Mamluk stuff in there. Check it out, learn more. Thank you again, Mustafa, for sharing your words tonight. Thank you, Abby, for being a wonderful co-interviewer. I hope you come back for another one. It was great. And thank you, our community, for listening to this phenomenal conversation. We do this every week to learn about the many different civilizations we have on our website. You can check us out at Alfusaic, that's ALFUSAIC, on all social medias, and our website, alfusaic.net. Have an awesome evening, everyone, and thanks so much for tuning in.
One more thing. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. And I really appreciate it. And I wanted to plug my book.
Oh, yes, of course. Absolutely, of course.
This is my new book. We Are Also Home. It is available on Amazon.
Cool.
And as you can see, I have a copy with me now. I'm working on getting the Audible out. And it's a riveting tale about invisibility and music. And it speaks to how a lot of women in the South Asian region are often overseen and overlooked and are often undermined for opportunities because of that lack of visibility that they feel in both Western and Eastern societies. Please check it out. Here's a quick flip through. I appreciate it
Phenomenal. Yes.
so much.
Two things to read now: The Mamluks and We Are Now Home. Thank you for writing this incredible novel, and please go read it, everyone. Engage with this great content too. Have a wonderful evening, all. Bye.